Hello and welcome to episode 15 of our Falke motor glider restoration series. Last time we ran into some trouble with our canopy. We restored the canopy frame and prepared it for painting. This time we will prepare the aileron control rods, the ailerons themselves and parts of the firewall for painting as well. By doing so we can paint all of it at the same time in a future episode. If you didn't see the previous episodes, then you can find a playlist in the top right corner. And of course, if you would like to stay up to date on our progress, please consider subscribing. In another episode we removed the aileron and airbrake control rods. Among those were some short ones. On all of them the paint was rather old, so we decided to sandblast all of them. Like with all the parts in the previous episodes, we used soda for sandblasting. The walls of all these tubes are very thin, most are only about half a millimeter thick. So you can imagine that we absolutely do not want to remove any metal, especially on important components such as these. Sandblasting with soda will only remove the paint and leave all the underlying metal intact. As you can see, the parts come out like new. Interesting is that the welds on the airbrake control rods have a different color. Most likely these are brazed rather than welded. After sandblasting we put all the parts in primer to prevent them from rusting. This is a special 2-component primer specifically designed for application on metal. After primer the control rods already look a lot better than they did before. We labeled the parts such that we can keep track of where they need to go once we start reassembling the controls. Besides the small parts we also have some really long control rods for the aileron that run all the way from the ring root to the bell crank in the wing that's part of the aileron drive mechanism. These control rods are at least 6 meters long. The paint of them is definitely up for restoration. What appears to be rust is actually dirt stuck in grease. Rather than only applying grease on the linear bearings in the wing, at some point the entire control rod was greased, which picked up a lot of dirt over the years. To make our lives easy we decided to sandblast the parts of the control rods that would fit in the sandblasting cabin. This is about 2 meters, saving us some work compared to sanding everything by hand. Also, the linkages at the end of the control rods are much easier to clean up using sandblasting due to the hard to reach spots. After a bit of final manual sanding, we had the control rods completely free of the old paint and dirt. All the metal seems to be in a very good condition. Perhaps all that excess grease on the control rods might have saved them from corroding. Therefore it was just a matter of degreasing everything and applying the 2-component primer to protect the bare metal from picking up some rust. The second control rod was restored in the same way. First remove all the old paint and then primer it. In a previous episode we sandblasted one of the ailerons. To do so we applied some paper tape to the wooden parts of the aileron to protect them against the soda blasting. Although this worked quite well, it was very hard to remove the tape afterwards. Basically, the only way was to sand it off. In the end this didn't matter too much because we needed to sand the old paint off anyway. Besides sanding the wood, there were a few mist spots on the metal which we fixed by hand. After that, it was just a matter of degreasing and putting the entire aileron in primer. Now that the old green paint is gone, the aileron already looks a lot fresher. Since the paper tape was very hard to remove after sandblasting, we used a textile based tape for the second aileron. As you can see, this was a lot easier to remove. After degreasing and painting this aileron with primer as well, we now have 2 ailerons ready for spray painting. But to make the spray painting even more efficient, we decided to also prepare all the firewall parts. These are parts that we will need for the fuselage soon anyway. The firewall is basically a sheet metal fire barrier between the engine and the cockpit. As you can see, some of the electrical wiring is very old. We will replace this later according to modern standards. After some more sandblasting by Jelle, who starts to get really good at it by now, we have some nice clean parts for the firewall. Just like with all the other parts in these episodes, all parts were painted with primer soon after sandblasting. The 2 large sections of firewall took quite some time to get clean using sandblasting, but eventually we managed. Well, mostly that is because some of the parts had a thick black sealant on them which was very hard to remove. I am wondering if someone knows if the sealant is also there on their Falkes. I would say that although it may keep some smoke out initially, it might be a fire hazard by itself. In any case, we need to remove it, so we scraped off the largest chunks, which took a lot of time because it's still kind of flexible. With most of the sealant removed, we tried to get rid of the remaining with solvents, which worked reasonably well but took a lot of time and a lot of solvent. To remove the last remainings, we used some Scotch-Brite. There's still some work to do on these pieces of firewall, but we are getting there. We decided to treat ourselves with one final easy task, reapplying the registration plate. In a way, this is actually a bit of a milestone as it gives the plane its identity back. The type plate must be a fireproof metal plate with the plane's registration and serial number engraved into it. It looks like our plate is still the factory original one, which means that the plane never changed registration. The registration plate is pop riveted to the frame using just 4 pop rivets, so not a huge task, but a nice one nonetheless. This is all for this episode. Thanks for watching and I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, please consider subscribing, and I hope to see you again next time.